If home is where the heart is, a roof is its shield. That's why for nearly 30 years, homeowners have trusted Garcia Roofing. For more information, visit garciadidmyroof.com.
Let me thank y'all for jumping up and getting down here. I know that's not easy always, but I wanted to report this today because we started an investigation last night. So, last night, one of our inmates was involved in 2 separate fights in our jail. One of the fights involved another inmate, and the second involved a correctional officer. The inmate was placed in a separation barrier while we prepared a place for him in disciplinary lockdown. When the correctional officer attempted to move the inmate charged towards the correctional officer. The correctional officer now has an obligation to protect himself. He has an obligation to protect other staff members at that jail, and he has an obligation to protect the public. The correctional officer responded by taking the inmate to the ground. All good. But it was at that point that the correctional officer used excessive force to control the inmate's movement. So I commend my warden for launching a quick investigation this morning, and as a result of our findings, the correctional officer was terminated and he was arrested for battery and malfeasance in office. The inmate was also arrested. He was arrested for battery from the fight that occurred earlier in the evening, and he was also charged with battery on correctional officers. And I say again, ladies and gentlemen, that our correctional officers, they have an obligation to protect themselves, protect other staff members at that jail, and protect the public. But excessive force cannot, and it just will not be tolerated at the sheriff's office. It is important that we police ourselves in all matters. So therefore, I wanted to report this today, and I'd also, at this point, Donovan, like to share that video, and then I'll take some questions afterwards. Now let me give you some perspective. This is a hallway at the jail in what we call our Unit 3. You see the 2 silver doors on the side. That leads into dormitories that has 75 inmates in each side, so they're open bay dormitories. Now this is a real jail, so sometimes when you have fights amongst inmates, it's important for our correctional officer to separate them. And what we do is we put them in a separation barrier, such as you see here, while we prepare other dormitories for them to be locked down into, whether it's disciplinary lockdown or a segregation lockdown while they're getting ready to go to disciplinary court. And as you can see, as my CO, correctional officer, was going to move him, the young inmate charged towards the correctional officer, and he responded to the point of putting him on the ground. But at that point, you've seen he used what we consider excessive force, and he was investigated this morning and terminated and charged. I'll answer any of the questions that you may have. Yes, sir.
When this happened, when did this happen exactly?
Yeah, this happened at 3 o'clock this morning.
And so what kind of steps did y'all take in the investigation to come up with the charges for this correction officer?
Well, it simply, when we got to work this morning, my warden reading the reports from last night and talking to some of the correction officers to find out what happened, and we have good video. In this instance, when you're looking at the video, you see what we see. And obviously, I said, okay, I think a correctional officer has the right to respond, has the right to defend himself. But once he got the inmate on the ground, I think he could have controlled that inmate. So we feel that he used excessive force in this instance.
Do we have a name on the officer or on the inmate?
Yes, so the officer's name, Marvin Brown Jr. Marvin Brown Jr. He was with us for 14 months. The inmate is Ricky Williams. He's 19 years old, and he's been in our jail for several months now.
What does the sheriff's office consider usually as excessive force?
Well, listen, you can control somebody with the force necessary to control the situation. So once you get beyond that, it becomes excessive. it's a continuum, right? So once you have the inmate on the ground, or you could have another correctional officer go with you. It wouldn't have been so unusual to have 2 correctional officers with him. But once you control the situation and you have control of it, then we think that's the necessary force. Anything beyond that, I would consider excessive force.
In the course of the investigation, were y'all able to determine if the inmate, Mr. Williams, was fighting back when he was on the ground, or is, from the video, it's kind of hard to tell whether or not he was resisting, whether he was fighting back. What did y'all find out through your investigation?
Yeah, no, well, I think what happened was Mr. Williams, you can tell when we opened the door that he lunged towards the charge towards the correctional officer. Correctional officer, fairly good sized fella, as you can tell. Once he got him on the ground, he was saying he was using open hand or closed hand just to try to restrict the inmate's movement. But in my mind, in my eyes, and the investigators, it was excessive. Once the inmate was on the ground, there was no need to use any more force to control him. The inmate does not complain of any serious injuries. Therefore, the officer is going to be charged with battery. You can see after the correctional officers leave the cell, the inmate's back at the front of the cell, and then he was successfully moved a while later to the disciplinary lockdown cell with no issues. So although I would say it's a quick investigation, you're talking to a sheriff who also ran a jail for 16 years. So I ran that jail for 16 years. And working with the warden and the investigators and the senior staff at that jail, this is one situation where we can consider it being excessive.
What about Officer Brown's record in his 14 years? Has he been an exemplary employee?
Yeah, in his 14 months. He was there for 14 months. He's had 2 previous, one for not making a call out in time, so he's on call. You call him to come to work and doesn't come on time. And the other one was when he was doing inmate medication. He didn't initial a couple of the medication that he was dispensing to the inmates. So nothing serious. That's kind of what happens when you're in that training phase and you get a chance to learn your trade as you go along, but certainly nothing like this.
So he hadn't been subject to any adverse employment action for suspension or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Is this protocol, I mean, I see one guy having just this particular officer go deal with a single inmate, or would it be normal to have?
Yeah, well, you can have a situation where you can, so many policies and procedures at the jail. So that's a jail that holds 572 inmates. There's probably close to 500 in there now. So there's going to be many, many times that a correctional officer will go make rounds on his own. He'll check on inmates on his own. And if the inmate is not acting out in such a way, you have to do that on your own. And most inmates do that very, very successfully. You had a question in the back.
Yeah, so what kind of training do the correctional officers have to when an inmate does charge at them like this?
Yeah, so we have what we consider a real rigorous training program. They go through an initial 92-hour post-academy, then they go through defensive tactic training, then they go through what we call annual training and quarterly training here at the Sheriff's Office. He just recently, I think, completed some defensive tactic training. So we think they are properly trained to do that. Moving inmates is not such an easy thing. And listen, you have to run a jail as a correctional officer. You have to run a small city filled with people who quite couldn't make it out in society, and you have to do it without a gun, without a baton, without any weapons. You have to do it and do it in a fair manner, and you have to do it with a lot of smarts and being smart about your job. And most of them do a great job. This happens fairly rarely in a jail. What I wanted to emphasize is that here, it's kind of like when you do something like this, you investigate it quick, you investigate it hard, and you come up with a conclusion on it. And this happened at 3 o'clock last night, and as of today, I think it's important for at least the public to know that this will not be tolerated, excessive force will not be tolerated, and we're going to police ourselves, and because if we don't, somebody else will, right? So it's important that we get it right.
So what now happens with the inmate and with the corrections officer? Is the inmate back in his regular dormitory?
No, the inmate has been moved into what we call a segregation cell, and he's going to be waiting on disciplinary court. He's going to be charged with battery, as I said earlier in my interview. The correctional officer, he's already been terminated and being charged probably as we speak, if he hadn't been charged yet with with battery and malfeasance in office. He's going to get a bond, and he's going to probably bond out of jail. And he's going to be held in our jail until he gets released. Now, he's going to be held segregated, right? He's not going to be put in general population. But this happens fairly quickly, and I expect him to be out of jail either tonight or maybe tomorrow if he makes the bond.
Was this the change termination, was it a unilateral decision by Sheriff Webre, or any input from somebody else, warden or anybody?
Listen, I learned long ago that I shouldn't make unilateral decisions, right? So you let the investigation unfold, you talk to your command staff, you put your heads together, and you look at the situation as a whole, and then you make decisions. But as a sheriff, I got to make the final decision on it. So everybody has input, but sometimes it's only the sheriff that can say, let's move forward this way. And that's a decision I made. It's a decision that was supported by my command staff and by my warden, and here we are today.
Nethkin is the warden.
Tony Nethkin is the warden, yes.
How's it work here in Ascension Parish? I know in EBR, there's civil service review and all that stuff, that if the corrections officer wanted to appeal, I mean, is there a process? What's the process like from there? Yeah,
so we have, we think, a vigorous investigation. We also interview the correctional officer, but as you know, like Baton Rouge Police Department and maybe other police departments are on the civil service rules.
Right.
Sheriff's Office are not. We are not on the civil service rules. We investigate things just like we would investigate anything out in the community. We investigate ourselves the same way, and we come to a conclusion. Now, again, I also had a quick conversation with our district attorney when this happened, so it's not like he's going to be surprised by this. So I talked to him, discussed it with him. He has not seen the video, and so I expect that his office will have to prosecute this case, no doubt.